listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. Well, I'm broadcasting live to you from the Pine Hills Palace just west of Orlando, Florida, and the underground bunker of the Pine Hills Palace. And I'm your host, Rob, and I found Dr. V, who was snowbound. Now he's alive. Good evening, Doctor. How are you?
Yes, I crawled inside a Yeti in order to stay warm. One of those things. So monsters you have out here. I used my proton pack because I didn't have a lightsaber, so I just crawled right inside there and just hid. So
Well, in all seriousness, I don't know what to call the show other than a rip show because we've had a few actors pass recently, Robert Conrad and Kirk Douglas, that we just want to spend a few minutes talking about. As always, we like to mention that you're the millennial in the group, so it'll be interesting to get your perspective. And I'll start off, I'll suggest that we start off with Kirk Douglas first. I see Ed's in chat, and he says, to be honest, I thought Kirk Douglas died years ago. Many years ago, Doctor, I ran a Deadpool with some people at a place of employment I was at. It was pretty successful, but it's kind of morbid in a way. But that was a brief thing that only happened for a couple years, and that's it. But Kirk Douglas is always tops on my list because I thought, God, he's 80, he's 90. And from my perspective as a kid growing up in the 70s and the 80s, where I really knew Kirk Douglas from was not from Kirk, but from Michael Douglas, from like Romancing the Stone. Oh, here's Kirk Douglas. Well, they look like him. My father's like, well, that's his father. Like, really? But for me, Kirk Douglas, everyone will say Spartacus and a bunch of other things. It all started with some cheesy movie on HBO called Saturn 3, where he's about 60 something years old, and Farrah Fawcett is in there. And I haven't seen it probably in almost 35, 40 years, but I'm like, wow, okay. And then Kirk Douglas, of course, was really popular, Streets of San Francisco, but was branching out in the movies, and I was a fan of his. I mean, I still am, but I was like, wow, I didn't realize that fathers and sons really had like this kind of Hollywood connection. And as a kid growing up, like I say, in the 70s and 80s, I didn't realize just how small Hollywood is when it comes to it, really basically having to know somebody for it. And of course, people talk about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and a bunch of other films with Kirk Douglas. But for me, like I say, I have not seen a ton of his films. I've seen several of them. My father used to watch all the old stuff, and I used to watch it with him. I know I've seen 20,000, Spartacus, and a couple others. But for me, let me ask you, the millennial group here, Doctor, what are your thoughts about Kirk Douglas? What do you remember seeing? What do you remember thinking about the guy?
uh 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was the first movie I ever saw with him, Disney. Uh as a kid, seeing that, even though he was like, kind of like, old and kind of hokey a little bit, but I was just like, remember seeing it, it's like, this is cool. The whole thing of Nautilus being a submarine under the ocean. And then the squid came out. I was like, nope, never going in the ocean. I was like, I was like, that was over in 5 seconds.
Yeah, now,
So, but
go ahead.
no, yeah, I saw that. It was such a great movie too. I mean, like this the way they did everything, how they the fight on the boat on the ship, they got the tentacles, how they just did everything behind the scenes is just great on that movie. Kirk Douglas is great in that movie. Plays a little guitar, sings even a little bit. Uh, yeah. That's pretty much the movie I saw with him. There was another one with John Wayne, and it was I thought it was called The Longest Day. I
Because I
believe
know
it's
you're a
one.
big war fan. You like watching war movies. I'm not that big into them, but obviously that was a big subject area that really a lot of movies were made on, especially at the time. He was really big in the 50s and 60s and whatnot too. But so yeah, I'm not too sure myself of which movie you're talking about here.
Oh, it's not The Longest Day. It's a different one. Okay. Because that one had Richard Burton. I would remember that one.
Well, that's true. And while you're trying to figure this movie name out, what I'll simply say is that one thing I think is kind of cool is when we start talking movies, and ones that you haven't seen is something that we actually focus on with the Extreme Classics channel. So your Richard Burton reference goes a long way because we've done Humphrey Bogart, we've done a few others, and then you start seeing how this person was in this film with this person, and it kind of starts to all make a little bit of sense to
Okay.
it. And
All right.
did you find
The
it?
one I watched. Yep. In Harm's Way.
Oh, okay. Okay, what do you remember about it?
I remember Kirk Douglas is playing. He's a corporal or private. Eddington or lieutenant. This was a lieutenant. That's what he was. Yes. It starts off with a party, and when you see this girl, she's kind of drunk and she's flirting with this guy. This couple is the other guy. He's like, and like his wife says like, you should go tell me, like, who that is, like, yeah. she's making a scenery mockery of it, and it turns out to be it's Kirk Douglas's his wife.
Hmm.
While he's away at sea, she's flirting with another guy, and they end up getting drunk snookered, going to the beach, and they end up they're at Pearl Harbor. So we had Pearl Harbor attacks happens. They're driving away, and as they're speeding up on a cliff the next morning, trying going, truck comes the other way, and they crash, and they instantly burn in flames. I was like,
Oh,
wow, that's
jeez.
instant. But I remember this movie that this was movie it was a really long movie. Uh, Kirk Douglas was I've never seen him in a role like this where he was just complete drunk, got in a bar fight with two guys, and like he eventually goes on and he ends up raping one of the nurses squads on a ship because he
Really?
got command of a ship. Yeah, I was like, I've never seen him like in like this is like horrible for Kirk Douglas. John Wayne though was like he's just a guy. He basically just he was not a general, but he was a commander, and he was he gets stuck doing office work, or no, he was going to do a secret mission for the for the U.S. Navy
Hmm.
for Midway, but yeah, John Wayne wasn't exciting in this one movie. Is what Kirk Douglas like he's basically stole the whole entire movie. Patricia O'Neill's in here. I mean Brandon Dwell, Jill Hathworth. I mean, there's a lot of people in there too.
One thing about
People
Kirk
might
Douglas, you mentioned his age. He was a little over 100 when he passed. Obviously, he came up in a different time in Hollywood, and the way the business was conducted then has changed, and he was one of the few people to experience it. Charlton Heston was another one I've mentioned before. What I think is pretty interesting about Kirk Douglas, just as a person, is whenever you had people that grew up or lived through the Depression, a lot of them had a very frugal sense of value to them when it came to doing things, and so some of them just valued hard work for its own sake. It's a very Puritanesque type, thing that it's not really. I'm bringing a religious thing in here so much. It's just a value that I don't know if is out there today because everything can be green screen. You can have no talent or charisma whatsoever, but the technology today allows people with a modest budget to make something that looks technically proficient. Whether it's shot that way or the people come across as believable is a whole nother conversation. One of the things I've always appreciated about Kirk Douglas, and it's one of the reasons why we do the classic show, is one, so we can talk about some people that are just icons of the industry, because I've found that as we've gotten older, those days seem to have gone away. But also, too, like I'd like to joke about you being a millennial in the group, we get to contrast some of that with what goes on today. And I know that you haven't really seen too much of the next person we'll talk about in a few moments, Robert Conrad, but for Kirk, I just know that he was somebody that worked really, really hard at trying to do the best job he could. And there's something to be said for somebody that totally throws themselves into the role, learns everything they can about it. There's something to be said for talent where you don't have to work very hard at something and it just comes to you easily. But there's just something that you can't take away from somebody that has a command of their body or a particular character that they have. Steve McQueen comes to mind as far as being a physical actor. Um, Kirk Douglas is one of those guys that reminds me like it too. And like I say, I was a big fan of his, not so much because I thought, oh, he's a great guy. I've seen a ton of his movies, but just he definitely had a screen presence to him. And his son, Michael Douglas, who brought me to him originally, really had that as well. And I've always liked him for that. And I go, God, the old expression, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I think applies here. And I know Eric's trying to show us how smart he is, like Out of the Past, 7 Days of May, The Bad and the Beautiful, all names I've recall. May have seen the Robert Mitchum one, but yeah, Eric, small audience. Hopefully, it gets bigger when it comes to the classic stuff. But man, this guy was definitely watchable on the screen. I think if you haven't seen any of his films, with obviously everything trending on Twitter the past few days, it's definitely worth watching. And for me, obviously, Spartacus is the probably go-to that everyone's going to check out. I think after that, I would probably just go to 20,000 Leagues because I remember seeing it as a kid, but I couldn't tell you too much about it. And it seems to be the one that you remember.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about this next person, Robert Conrad, because I'm going to gush a lot about him myself. But I think you told me offline you never even heard of this guy. Is that true?
Never heard of him.
Okay, so he
I
passed.
did not even know there was a show for Wild Wild West. I was wondering where they got the horrible movie idea from.
Well, I want to start from the Wild West movie and go backwards with Robert Conrad because to me, when Eglinton from I Love Comics and Old Man Comics and the Homegrown Tourist and I decided to launch the Xtreme Movie Show, it's because we've been friends for almost 40 years talking movies and making lists and just having a good time with it, just basically doing that online now. My intense hatred for basically anything current for the most part, or contrarian point of view, as I always like to point out on the streams, starts mostly in the late 90s with certain films. And The Wild Wild West with Will Smith, I could argue it is the movie that really triggered me because yes, it has Selma Hayek in it. To me, it felt absolutely nothing like the show that we'll talk about here in a moment. It had hip hop music in it or something. I remember going, "What is this crap?" I mean, it's just absolutely it was disgusting to me. I was like, I get if you remake something for kids or like we talked about earlier, remaking certain movies, reimaging them can be okay if you treat the source material with a little bit of dignity or respect and you don't crap all over it. And that can be hard to do. And I think it can be hard to capture what made things successful in the first place, which a lot of bombs are having currently with a lot of DC and Marvel films. But for the Wild Wild West with Will Smith, at least Robert Conrad was honest when back in the time when he was asked about it. He said, I think they just did a horrible job with the movie. And he actually went for the Razzie Awards and picked them up in person as himself, to show everybody how much he appreciated the fact that they knew that the movie sucked compared to the show. But Robert Conrad, I will start off by saying, not a big guy physically, but one of the most physically intense and actors there are. I mean, he was one of those body type actors, I like to call it, like a Tom Cruise or like a Steve McQueen, not so much a thespian type. This guy had charisma oozing out of him. Obviously, a very good looking individual. He started off as a singer, he was a boxer. Um, this Wild Wild West show, like a lot of people like to will tell you if you haven't heard, is like James Bond of the Old West because he's a Secret Service agent, James West, and he's got a partner, Artemis Gordon, that works with him, who's like his equal, except for Artemis is like a really smart dude, but he's the master of disguise, where the man of action, of course, is Mr. West. And growing up as a kid in my household, our household, we were not allowed to just watch TV on Saturday mornings, cartoons, everything else. We had to have breakfast first, do our chores, and then our parents were up and about doing stuff. They would say you are allowed to watch this or you are allowed to watch that, or if it was something questionable, they would watch it with us. So one of the very first shows I had a chance to watch as a child was The Wild Wild West with my father and my brother. And this show was fantastic because it was smart, there was a lot of action in it, and here's the thing that I wanted to impress upon people that don't know about Robert Conrad being physical and good looking. He did like 80, 90, 95% of his own stunts, choreographed it. He's one of the last actors to do his own stunts, and you can see it on screen. He gets hit, he falls through stuff, he's broken a skull. I mean, the guy's just flat out a stud when it comes to it, and it was just an enjoyable show that a lot of people thought it was too violent at the time, God forbid. But yeah, 4 seasons of the Wild Wild West before he went on to do some other things. He started off doing, in a Hawaiian show, and then he did this one. Then he did A Man Called Song, which is 1 season, but it had a kind of a cool sidekick, character in it, and I saw a few episodes of that. But this guy, he just had that kind of charisma that when you watched him as a kid, I remember it being like a teenager and a young adult going, oh, he's doing the show, this rescue ranger type thing in California or something, because that's what he did in real life. And he did Baba
Right?
Black Sheep, which is a big war thing that a lot of people were into at the time. I mean, this guy I could just go on about. So let me stop for a moment and let you get some words in.
Like I said, I haven't watched anything. I don't know who he is. I haven't really watched anything with him, so I can't have nothing to say about him. Sucks that he died. The only thing I ever saw from this guy is that he was on Larry King, and he said he hated doing Wild Wild West. He said he hated the show. So that's all I know from
I
him.
don't recall that particular interview. Oh, let me
So
ask you
Larry,
this. Did you see Jingle All the Way with Arnold? The toy?
ages ago.
He was the cop on the motorcycle that was writing them tickets with the white hair and glasses.
Okay,
Okay, so
I'll have
that
to, I'll have
might
to
be a
look for
little
it
bit
again.
more of a recent reference for some people. Well, not quite. Maybe 20 years ago, he had gotten into a car accident.
Well,
He was drunk and he had hit somebody, and that person ended up dying a couple years later. And he's kind of done a podcast recently, like once a week for a couple hours, telling stories and stuff. He's aged really well. He's really, really sharp mind and all that. So he's not really been in the public limelight. So other than the Jingle All the Way bit, you really wouldn't know that unless you were young and you grew up
I
watching
mean,
those kind of shows.
it's no different than it's no different than Burt Lancaster. He was in Field of Dreams. That's all I ever saw him in. I know he's in. I know. Was it something of Arabia? Yeah, Saudi or whatever that
Lawrence
is. Prince of
Arabia.
Arabia.
Hmm.
Yeah, Lawrence Arabia. Yeah, that's all I know. Other than that, yeah.
Well, the last thing I'll say about Robert Conrad with the Wild Wild West, like I say, it's a great show. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the ones originally that had been talked about. If we ever branch off into TV, maybe trying to do that. It's of course it's a question of how much consumer interest there is in it for us going over it and stuff there too. But it's kind of interesting to me that we've talked recently about like Humphrey Bogart, who's a man's man. We even talked about Charles Bronson recently and how much we like him and his charisma and how it just comes across on the screen when we reviewed The Mechanic. This guy, Robert Conrad, I mean, he was like literally one of the last of the kinds to I think, come across that way because once you get in the 80s, you and I have covered a lot of Chuck Norris movies and Jean-Claude Van Damme's and Seagal's and whatnot. And while we like a lot of individual things about those guys, I think for Robert Conrad, I think he kind of set the template a little bit for just action TV the way it should be done. And I'm trying really hard right now to think of a show after that a lot of the actors would do their own stunts and you would have a smart person who was your partner. Like in here, it's Artemis Gordon. I always say it's like the Holmes and Watson show, like the Jeremy Brett from the BBC in the 80s to the 90s that I'm a big fan of. I'll close on this one story because I'm looking at a picture that's flowing through here right now. There was a big show in the 70s called the Battle of the Network TV Stars. And what they would do is like ABC and like I think NBC and maybe even CBS, some of the three main networks at the time, they would take some of the actors and actresses from very popular shows and they would run them through like obstacle courses stuff, kind of like the whole ninja course sort of thing, but beforehand. This is one of the earlier shows to do it. And Robert Conrad was just a super intense, ultra competitive kind of guy. I mean, a nice guy. Everybody loves him. He's not a jerk that way. But he was in a bunch of commercials in the 70s for a battery, and he would put it on his shoulder and he'd say, I dare you to knock it off. And just the way he delivers it, you're like, he's cheesing it up, but he's got that intensity about him. And the Incredible Hulk, another great 70s show, kind of, like the Invaders, Man of the Week sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Lou Ferrigno comes out because he was obviously popular from the show, and he comes out and he stands next to him. They're playing like Simon Says or whatever, and he ends up like knocking it off. But then Conrad actually beats him, and it's like you see this guy who's probably like 5'9", 150 pounds, and then you see Lou Ferrigno who's almost twice that size next to him, growling at him and doing all the Hulk stuff, and you're like, wow, this is what it was on TV in the 70s. And I can't say I'm the biggest TV historian or fan, and I know that Angleton has seen every single film that's come out and a lot more TV than I have. But there's a lot of entertaining TV in the 70s that bled over into the 80s. And that's why I've always said, 80s TV shows and 70s, a lot of them were just a lot of fun. They had their stick down pat for what they would do, and it really came across great. But yeah, the Wild Wild West, lovely show. I mean, obviously with him passing, it makes me want to rewatch some of it because I tell you, the movie did not do it justice. The movie was god awful. It captures absolutely nothing like the show, much in the way the reboot of Nancy Drew doesn't capture anything about the character at all on the CW or a lot of these rebooting type things. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of this internet type people that like review things reviewing not they're so young that they're not able to go back and look at the originals and compare them because they hadn't lived it and they don't know it. And I don't know. I mean, Doctor, let me ask you this. You're obviously a lot more hip to what's current than I am these days and all that too. What's your overall take on rebooting stuff in general?
If something is really good back then, I just really wouldn't reboot it. It just seems like look at Invasion of Bystanders. That thing's had four reboots,
Mm-hmm.
or four incarnations of the original um, adaptations, I guess, off the book. Um, if you're gonna do a reboot, I don't know. It's like maybe from a movie that was originally already crappy, maybe the one that bombed. at the office. Maybe you could reinvent it, do it.
Hmm.
But if something that made like a lot of $1 million, like when they tried to do Ghostbusters, they rebooted just all they did was reboot it basically to practical. They thought they could take the franchise, make money off it, and do a propaganda thing. It's like that I don't like. Like if they were trying to do, there's certain movies you can't do, like icons, like as far as like Back to the Future, you can't reboot that. You can't. Christopher Lloyd, and what's his name, Michael J. Fox.
Hmm.
You're not gonna be able to recreate that magic. It's gone. It's yeah. You're better off creating an original story with people who aren't known actors. It's
Well, Ghostbusters. We did a review on the fact that another movie is going to be coming out too. So, I mean, would you have some fear about something that you loved and cherished, growing up? I know it's one of your favorite things, but I mean, to me,
well,
when the Wild West movie came out, I was like, oh dear Lord, let me go see it and just hope it's tolerable, and it
I
really pissed
watched
me
it. It's
off.
still one of those movies I just can't watch again. I watched it once and it was like, eh. So I didn't care to watch it. There's a lot of movies I only watch once. There's very few, like I told you, like the movie The Recruit. I can watch it over again because it's so well done. Now, if they were trying to reboot that, it wouldn't have the same magic to me. It's I guess for the people who never grew up and watched originals, when they see a reboot, it might be better to them because they don't have the experience like we do. We've already seen the movie, you know.
Hmm.
Like my niece, she loves the what was that the It movie, the new one
Right.
versus the originals. Now, if she would have grown up watching the originals, then she may would have liked those better, But then a lot of these kids are spoiled, They're like, wow, it doesn't have CG. All looks stupid. I want to see the new one. It's like, okay. So you have no, you basically one of those people. You basically just spend your money on a movie that's horrible versus actually going back and watching something that actually took time and effort, and actually made money. Exactly was good. Well, because you can't top Tim Curry. I'm sorry, you cannot. Tim Curry as Pennywise. No, sorry, he's just got that iconic voice. That's the way it is. Um, Same thing. If you were to try to recreate the Robin Williams hook or any Robin Williams movie without him, it would just be an insult to Robin Williams, man. What he did. It's like you're erasing him, you know, from history. Basically.
Well,
That's what I
let me
say.
ask you this also. Like, I know we talked a little bit about Kirk Douglas to start off, and we obviously haven't seen the full catalog, and unless you're a hardcore Kirk Douglas fan or you're a lot older and that was your thing, it's understandable that we're going to cherry pick certain things to go out and watch. And frankly, for me, like I say, I grew up on Robert Conrad and very little Kirk Douglas, and I admit that right off the bat. But we've talked about, even though you haven't seen the Wild Wild West, I've talked about how it's just a really cool hip show, very physical. He's a man's man. We talked about Charles Bronson with The Mechanic. We've talked about Charlton Heston a little bit, like in Soylent Green and a few others. We've talked about Humphrey Bogart. And so the running theme to me for some of these older action stars is that they're like a man's man. There's somebody that growing up as a kid, it's very influential. Like for me, watching it going, hey, here's a handsome guy. He's cultured. He dresses well. He's smart. He's physical. He's the total package, to use the wrestling term. And I look at today's movies in general, and I go, very rarely do I see it. We talk about how Tom Cruise puts together a good film. Of course, he's no Jack Reacher, based off the books. And we talk about how Henry Cavill's got a great physique, but maybe a little empty looking, headed. I don't know what the word is. Something's missing. It's very hard to find what I would call a complete man in a film. And so when I'd heard about Kirk Douglas and then Robert Conrad right after that, it just really kind of drove that point home that, yeah, I don't know who we can really look up to as a man's man in today's world. So let me ask you, more recently, one, is there anybody that can come to your head, off the top of your head, that you can think of that we could probably consider that way today? And two, based off the old stuff that you've watched and we've covered, and new films, can you see that there's a difference, or what do you think about that?
As far as rebooting stuff, see a difference between the new stuff and the old stuff. What do you mean, like?
Well, just the men in films of the other day seemed like they were real men, whereas today's men aren't.
Well, you gotta see. I love to say that yes, the type of movies we had back then. Today, everything's about comedies, but it's just where you have stupid stuff like Seth Rogen movies. It's just like Pineapple Express. Yeah, it was funny a little bit, but if you think about it, it's like that's all it is. It's just people just getting stoned, not working. It's I Ocean's 11. It was a lot of yeah. Any movies you see example it might be of like a Man's Man is a reboot of original Man. It's a big movie,
Hmm.
and it's great. Um, Perfect example would be you taking a movie, making a movie off a TV show. Will Smith movie was not that great. Will Smith was the worst part of the whole entire movie. Uh, uh, Look at the other movies they had. What was another no they reboot off a TV series? Starsky and Hutch. As funny as that was, that could have been a serious reboot. They could have done that. Maybe people would have got interested in watching the show. Maybe reboot it. Because I look at the show like what they did with the show with the rookie with Nathan Fillion
Hmm.
on an TV series. That's a reboot of a TV series. It's a TV series. Now they redid that and from the '70s, and it's entertaining. There's a little bit of comedy, but it's really serious though. It's actually surprised that ABC actually let it go past a season because a lot of times they will nick their shows, in the butt. So,
Yeah,
um,
and that's one of the things too, and I think you're bringing up a really good point here with reboots. Obviously, you're trying to capture a new generation. The goal is to make money. You're trying to keep your rights active if you have a TV show under license and stuff. And so, without following all the big media companies that exist today and who has what rights, it's probably a little simpler back then. To me, I look at something like a Wild Wild West, and I assume that the people in the boardroom sat down and said, okay, we're going to do this movie. We're going to put XYZ in there, and if it's good enough, then we can launch a TV show or something derivative of it. And I just don't know why they don't spend a little bit more time planning it out and actually making a good quality thing. Because if you can, then you could totally launch it instead of any of this derivative type crap that's out there. And I just go, you're stripped away everything that made the Wild Wild West good, and I believe there's plenty of people around at the time that knew what it was, as opposed to young writers today. So yeah, it made money probably. I'm sure it turned a little bit of a profit, but they never made a second one, I don't believe, and it was just sort of there. And I know Mr. Robert Conrad is pretty disgusted about it himself that they did that. So it's just, as an actor, you get paid the money to do your role and that's it. But I just look at people like I can't even think of anybody today that comes to mind that I go, I really, really think's great. I mean, I don't know. It's just I think part of it too is we're imprinted when we're young with certain people and certain shows, and we kind of use that as our basis for forming everything. I know Eric's seen a lot of stuff, and I think Eric's got a great command of say the '70s type shows. But it's true. Ed Burr saying that California water is filled with soy, and back then it wasn't
yeah,
with the type of actor.
the last time we had any male strong male influences, man's man was Chuck Norris, man. Uh, he was the guy, man. He was Invasion USA, all those movies. Lone Wolf McQuade, man.
Yeah,
The
that was really
'80s was
good.
the last. The '80s is your last hurrah for man-made movies. Clint Eastwood movies, man. Dirty Harry's. Those were the last ones. You're not gonna see anything like that anymore. If you do, it's like because a lot of this whole Me Too guys are not allowed to be strong guys.
Hmm.
Guys are supposed to be effeminate, and women are supposed to be strong. It's Hollywood. They're trying to reverse the roles, and they're bombing horribly. Because nobody wants to see that stuff. Birds of Prey, tough girls, and it's not going well. And what they do, they blame it on guys. Charlie's Angels, they blame it on guys because guys won't see it. Well, if you take an iconic character that already was hot and make it as ugly as possible, well, of course we're not going to see it. And then plus, on top of that, you're telling us before we even see it that we're bad people, we're misogynists, that we're horrible people, and this movie's not made for us. Well, why would we go see it then? I guess I'm literally I've been since I would say but mid 2000s, 2007, 2008, somewhere around there. I just stopped going to theaters and watching movies. I watch them at home. I'm not gonna pay $12 to go watch a movie and have it just be complete crap. Um, but I don't want to sound too negative though, because there has been some good movies I actually did see in the theater. And it's been and I'll get crap for this too because it's the Tom Cruise stuff. I watched the Mission Impossibles, man. I watched Oblivion. I watched the Edge of Tomorrow. Why? Because Tom Cruise delivers. You hate him as much as a person you want to, but he delivers on his movies.
Yeah, and Clint Eastwood is one of the last ones there too, and when he goes, that's going to be a big thing. But I tell you, Richard Jewell was one of the best movies of the year, in my opinion. I could give a rat's ass about the Oscars and a bunch of small people in their bubble, basically, patting each other in the back on all these awards. I could totally care less. For those of you that are interested, I believe Angling Team
Well,
from I Love Comics is going to be doing a stream on it. He may be streaming live or on a delay, but that's a Super Bowl, so you can check him out
yeah,
here in a moment when we're
real
done.
soon. Yeah, and also, yeah, Tom Hardy has been really good, and I like him in Venom, I like him in Lawless. There's talks of them doing another Mad Max movie with him. So
Yeah, Tom Hardy. If I thought he started off as a really small dude, like I don't know if he modeled a little bit or something, and then he put
watch
on
Legend,
what's
dude.
that?
Watch Legend with him, where he plays the twin mobsters, British mobsters.
Mm-hmm.
Great movie.
Okay. Yeah, Tom Hardy came to mind because of that, but then you also had Miller, who was involved in with all the original Mad Maxes. So Mad's doing
Dennis
it the
Miller.
right way. Mike Miller, whatever the guy's name
Oh,
is that directed the movies or wrote them or whatever. Basically the
Frank
same.
Miller.
I,
Yeah.
I don't. I think Frank's Comics. I Miller's just the name I remember. But yeah, that's why I thought Tom Hardy worked well with it, and I thought Tom Hardy's more recent performances are things that I've liked seeing him into. So Tom Hardy's possibly up there. Um, Christian Bale is a bit good, but he's got that soy thing to him. I don't know how to explain it. I can see beneath him. So I'm not quite totally sure about it, and I appreciate his acting, but in terms of masculinity and the complete package, Tom Hardy maybe. But yeah, so anyway, with Tom Cruise, you mentioned seeing the Mission Impossibles. Yes, we're going to see him just like Clint Eastwood because they deliver. They're going to make good movies. And
Exactly.
unfortunately, I think we've had pretty much about a generation's worth of inconsistent at best ability to deliver a good product on the screen or on TV consistently. The scary part to me about it is the fact that I think that a lot of the writers and people in charge of making decisions, unless they're really, really individual type people,
Eh,
the group
I mean,
think
plus,
it's all PC Me Too stuff, and they totally miss out what made something like the Wild Wild West really great, or a lot of things before that.
yeah. Young Russell Crowe in Gladiator. That was a good movie.
Russell Crowe,
Um,
yeah, that's a good call. That's a good pick.
Proof of Life. He was in that as well.
The next three
That was the
days
one.
I liked as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin Costner here. Yeah, Mr. Brooks. uh, James Garner, man, and the Rockford Files, man, Megan P.I., all those stuff, and that's your man's man stuff. And I put them in the same class as Kirk Douglas, man, and Robert Conrad. All these guys. The Sean Connery movies, man. Fortress. You had Christopher Lambert, man, doing these off. You could tell how it's pretty much just you're basically ashamed. Like you should know. We're trying. People are Hollywood's like we're not gonna make women's movies for guys anymore. We're gonna make women movies for women. So that's what they want to do. They're tired of the guys being the main characters.
It's
You
sad,
know,
really. It
they
really
want to
is.
change up. It's all it is. It's a whole attack on the whole naturalism of the family. They want to shake up the whole family because they don't like the idea of having one man, one woman, and having children. They'd rather have people not having children, which is dumb because how do you freaking survive if you just thin out the herd too much? In some cases, it's good because there are some people they think should go. I'm not going to name names. I'm just saying if you can't read a warning label, you don't deserve to be here.
Well, really, Kirk Douglas, yeah, he was definitely an icon. Robert Conrad, when he passed from me, like I say, it was just I have a lot of special memories. Like I say, growing up watching the show was the first treats that I got, to actually be able to sit down in the one TV in the living room and watch, and we had black and white one, then we've got a color one, and it was a big deal. And yeah, I mean, so you remember these things here too, and I'm starting to find, because I'm kind of caught between Eric's age and your age here a little bit about what to go back and watch, and I don't want
You're,
to say
you're,
I feel
you're,
crazy when I go, hey, I'll just go watch reruns of a show that was 40, 50 years old, because you know what, it's a hell of a lot better than what's on TV today. And
you're,
I we give
yeah,
things try we try things out here on the Extreme Movie Show. We do some TV stuff, and it's been a mixed bag at best. Final thoughts, sir.
yeah. Final thoughts. Go watch Clint Eastwood. Go watch Kirk Douglas. If you don't like Kirk Douglas, watch Martin Sheen, Apocalypse Now. Get some testosterone flowing, crack open a non-alcoholic beer for Eric Breen. And,
Go see Johnny Mathis before he crooks too, because we'll probably do a rip stream on him because he's one of my favorite singers and he's an old timer. Same thing with music. I think applies, although this is mostly a movie show. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. My goodness, wow. Well, Doctor, I hope that at some point we get a chance to, and whether it's this year, next year, the year after that, review a little bit of Robert Conrad, some more Kirk Douglas. We'll probably get to Kirk before Robert, but the Wild Wild West. If you're looking for something, I think the first season's a black and white, then eventually it goes to color.
it's funny to say that because Kirk went before Robert.
Well, I'm just saying it's a show where that's really good. But you know what? You like war stuff and you like action. Blah blah Black Sheep might be something worth watching. I can't say I was the biggest fan of that show. I only saw a few episodes. I don't remember it too much. I do remember it.
I don't know. I want to
You
do
might
some more
like it.
Richard Burton. We got to do some more Richard Burton movies, man. Get a little bit of John Wayne.
Well, I think that's going to come. So it's just a question whether it's going to be on the classics or something else. Sir Richard Burton, like
I don't
Sir
know. This
William
is
Regal.
Rob's classic cinema. We got to start doing some old movies. Like we just got to get the Duke in there. Maybe some old True Grit. Richard Cogburn.
Yeah, I think that's all coming too. Hey, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up tonight. Ed, Eric, I know you guys are old time fans and all that too, and you really appreciate a lot of the older stuff too. I'm glad that we got a chance to share some of these thoughts with you. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about the positives of Kirk Douglas's life and Robert Conrad, what we knew about him, the millennials perspective, the '80s guy perspective, mine and y'all's as well too. So go see Spartacus if you haven't. Go see the Wild Wild West, not that friggin' piece of crap movie. Or if you're feeling really cheesy, A Man Called Sloan. You might be able to find that on YouTube free.
Or that one crazy movie with what's his name? Fake Captain Kirk. William Shatner's movie. The one with crazy. And then the one we covered. The guy
Shatner's
is
movie. Oh, the one filmed in Tampa.
yes.
Impulse.
Impulse. Yes, that's what it is.
Columbo.
See?
Robert Conrad was on an episode of Columbo. Just saying. A lot of crossover appeal. So, okay, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and the links and all the good stuff about the Extreme Movie Show. Have a good night, everybody. Stay extreme.
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 Extreme.